You're watching the best of the Qatar Economic Forum. I'm Manish Cranny in Doha. This week's event, which was powered by Bloomberg, brought together global business leaders and heads of state to tackle some of the world's most pressing challenges, from snarled supply chains and escalating inflation to Russia's military assault on Ukraine. Over the next half hour, we'll bring you all the highlights from the most important interviews and conversations, beginning with Elon Musk. The world's richest person spoke to Bloomberg's editor-in-chief John Micklethwait about his headcount plans at Tesla, why he thinks a recession is inevitable, and of course his ongoing bid for Twitter.
With respect to the Twitter transaction, there's a limit to what I can say publicly, given that it is somewhat of a sensitive matter. So I will have to be measured in my responses here. Such as not to generate incremental lawsuits. Unfortunately,
that seems to be a risk you sometimes manage to overcome.
Yes, deposition minimization is, I think, important.
Have Twitter given you enough information?
Well, there are still a few unresolved matters. You've probably read about the question as to whether the number of fake and spam users on the system is less than 5%, as Twitter claims, which I think is probably not most people's experience when using Twitter. So we're still awaiting resolution on that matter, and that is a very significant matter. So we're awaiting resolution on that. And then, of course, there is the question of will the debt portion of the round come together, and then will the shareholders vote in favor? So I think those are the three things that stand in the, that need to be resolved before the transaction can complete.
What about the general state of the economy? Does that weigh on you when you think about this? I mean, you just described it. You have a super bad feeling about the economy. Are you still in that position? I just said to you earlier, Joe Biden has just come out and said that a recession in America is not inevitable. How do you feel about the economy?
Well, I think a recession is inevitable at some point. As to whether there is a recession in the near term, I think that is more likely than not. It certainly isn't. It's not a certainty, but it appears more likely than not. And what do you think?
I'm with you. I agree with you. I think it's more likely. Can I ask you one particular thing to do with the Twitter bid, which is, you are one of the biggest and fastest growing investors in China. Tesla, you've talked about it being a third of your sales going forward. You're now buying Twitter, the kind of public forum for free speech. The Chinese historically don't tend to be very enthusiastic about free speech. Are you worried about whether you can keep those two particular horses running? Is buying Twitter going to get you in trouble with the Chinese?
Well, Twitter does not operate in China.
Yes.
So, and I think China does not attempt to interfere with the free speech of the press in the U.S. As far as I know, because I assume you're not under pressure at Bloomberg from China. So I think there's, I don't think this is going to be an issue.
And in terms generally of that issue of freedom of speech and Twitter, you've talked about Twitter making it even freer and letting more people onto it. Is there a limit at all to who you think should be allowed onto Twitter?
My aspiration for Twitter, or in general for the digital town square, would be that it is as inclusive, in the broader sense of the word, as possible. That it is an appealing system to use. So, I mean, ideally, I'd like to get like 80% of, that's in North America, and perhaps, I don't know, half the world or something, ultimately on Twitter in one form or another. And that means it must be something that is appealing to people. It obviously cannot be a place where they feel uncomfortable or harassed, or they'll simply not use it.
Can you set the record straight on one thing, which is this issue about the layoffs? I think you said initially that Tesla, 10% of the workforce would be cut, then 10% of salaried would be cut, then salaried would stay flat and overall headcount would go up. What is the number? I know there's already, I think, been a lawsuit about the 10%. Is 10% the goal to reduce the workforce, or what is the number that we should think about, or that you're planning?
So Tesla is reducing the salaried workforce by roughly 10% over the next probably 3 months or so. We expect to grow our hourly workforce. It's quite clear that we expect to grow our hourly workforce, but we grew very fast on the salaried side, and we grew a little too fast in some areas, and so it requires a reduction in the salaried workforce. And we're about 2/3 hourly and 1/3 salary. So I guess technically a 10% reduction in the salaried workforce is only roughly a 3.5% reduction in total headcount.
So Elon Musk thinks a recession is inevitable. Egypt's finance minister doesn't think we're in one yet, but does reckon the economy is slowing. I caught up with Mohammed Mate.
No, we are not already in a recession, but we have now a downgrading of economic recovery. We have seen World Bank, IMF, and others have reduced their expectation for economic growth. But if the current direction to be continued and might be even escalated, I believe that inevitably we will go for recession.
And do you see that because of higher interest rates that are coming to bear in your economy and the global economy?
It's a package of elements will work together, leading us to recession. Inflation, high cost of financing, food security, concern about the war and the extent of the war, and whether this war can be accelerated somewhere or another, and also pressure on many developing countries in this world, which can contribute heavily to economic growth, will have to suffer from the negative impact, which will be at the expense of their ability to grow.
Are you in shock or panic over fuel and food at the moment?
Panic rather than a shock. I believe that if things will accelerate further, it will materialize to a big shock.
The consequence of food and fuel is 13% core inflation, sir. I've had people tell me inflation is topping out. It's over. Second half of the year it'll get better. Do you share that view? Do you think inflation has plateaued or topped out?
Expectation is to increase, not to decrease.
Significantly?
It depends. If oil prices will continue this trend, if food prices continue to this trend, if the federals and the other central banks will increase interest further, definitely we will go for further inflation. Particularly that, we may start to see, in addition to what we have seen until now, more interruption to trade, more interruption to supply chain, and difficulties to get financing.
So it's 13% on the core at the moment. How bad could it get?
If you are talking about Egypt in particular,
indeed, sir.
13%, will depend on how much inflation we are importing. This is a significant part. Why? Because if inflation accelerates further in Europe, in the United States of America, as a result of all these factors, and in addition to that, higher interest rate will add to higher cost of financing.
Indeed.
This will mean that we will be negatively impacted. We hope that this will not be materialized in the coming period. So we should, I'm worried also about how the monetary policy as a central bank of Egypt will look at the situation, whether they will increase further basis point for their base rate. They have already increased 300 basis point, and we don't know what will be their decisions very soon to react to inflation.
So you are worried about further significant rate hikes from the central bank?
Yes, I'm worried, and I hope that we can let the Egyptian economy to grow, and high cost of financing, it will be a problem for the industry, for the financing cost, for the economy, but eventually inflation is a core business. Inflation control is part of the core business for Central Bank of Egypt.
Up next, the Deputy Chairman and CEO of the Kuwait Petroleum Corporation tells us how much of a premium he thinks the war in Ukraine has put in the oil prices. This is Bloomberg. You're welcome back to the best of the Qatar Economic Forum. Energy was, of course, the major theme of the week. And the Deputy Chair and CEO of the Kuwait Petroleum Corporation told us he thinks the war in Ukraine has only highlighted how important energy is to the world. Sheikh Nawaf Al Sabah reckons the conflict has put a $30 barrel premium into the oil market. He caught up with my colleague, Francine Lacroix.
We think that oil is there for the long term in terms of even in any energy transition. So we may be concerned about what obviously the next 18 months is going to do for financing and for our cash balances, but over the long term we're quite confident that oil will remain at stable and good enough prices for us.
How does the short term, the war in Ukraine, of course what we're seeing with COVID, change the energy transition? So the IEA said, look, we have to stop with fossil fuels if we're going to save our planet. Does that get pushed back?
No, you have to keep an eye on that as well. But the mistake that a lot of people had made before the Ukraine war was to say this is going to be a war against fossil fuels and that we must stop oil production. Well, the world is using more carbon now than it ever did before, and this crisis in the Ukraine, next to all the humanitarian issues that come with it, shows you that energy is required to fuel the future, and hydrocarbons have a big role to play. Now, can we make the hydrocarbons cleaner and more efficient? Absolutely, that's what we're trying to do, and that's what we're investing in, whether it's through carbon capture, utilization, and storage, using carbon as EOR processes, or really abating the carbon footprint of the oil barrel. We're in Kuwait, and I mentioned this earlier today, we're in Kuwait at the lowest end of the cost curve, both in cash cost and carbon footprint. Now, we need to stay there. That's going to require a lot of investment.
But there are many people, if you speak to climate activists, I mean, they say it's just bad. So does the crisis actually and the war in Ukraine mean that we'll reach peak oil a lot longer?
No, I don't think so.
See more investment in the short term, or no?
No, you will see continued investment. I mean, at prices where they are, that is spurring investment. You're seeing some rigs coming back into action in the Permian, and you're seeing U.S. production going up over time. You're seeing a lot of us also continuing to produce. Now, for companies like KPC, we look at the long term, so we're investing right through the cycle. Yeah. But companies that don't do that are putting in more investment right now. The question right now is really about the cash cost of those investments. With inflation and steel prices and whatnot going through the roof, it's going to be an issue.
But the oil price and the energy price is so high right now. When are you expecting these prices to stabilize?
I see a war premium of about $30 in the current price right now. that, but for the war in Ukraine, you'd probably be seeing about $80, $90 barrel oil, which is not that high. And that is adjusted for inflation over the past period. It's actually, it takes you back to the last big bump that we had, somewhere in the $60, $70 range, which is still comfortable. And remember, the energy intensity of the world economy is about a third of what it was about 20 years ago. And it's continuing to go down. So oil prices, yes, they do impact economic growth to a certain extent, but the size of that impact has diminished incredibly.
Do you see any demand destruction in our conversation?
Right now, I don't see it.
Anywhere?
I see demand curtailment of growth. I haven't yet seen demand destruction. We're getting the same calls from our customers demanding the same amount of oil, and in some cases a little bit more.
Up next, Steve Mnuchin on why he has a lot of confidence in Jay Powell in the fight against inflation. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to the best of Qatar Economic Forum. Former Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin says inflation in the US can be brought under control if energy prices settle down and the Federal Reserve follows through on its pledge to continue raising interest rates. He spoke to Bloomberg's Eric Schatzka.
I do have a lot of confidence in Chair Powell. By the way, it's fun I can now talk about the Fed. I wasn't allowed to talk about Fed policy for many years. I guess my most important advice to the administration is don't do anything to shock the economy. So they had been talking about raising taxes. They had been talking about making different changes. Now is not the time to put any additional shocks. Things like gas tax on the margin may help a little bit, but this is really now the Federal Reserve's job, and the administration needs to be careful not to get in the way. I do think, the number one thing the administration can do, and I think it's not just them, it's obviously other world leaders, is we need to find a political solution to this war. The military solution alone is not going to be what stops this.
You have confidence in Chairman Powell, whom you know well, having worked together with him and other members of the Federal Reserve. The reality, however, is that financial markets aren't certain whether they have confidence in Chairman Powell. There's a growing consensus that the Federal Reserve isn't raising rates fast enough, and the Fed lost credibility with its perspective on inflation that it was transitory. Two questions. Do you think that the Federal Reserve needs to raise rates at a faster clip than they have outlined for the American public, and for that matter, for the world? And what will it take to restore that lost credibility?
Well, let me just say, it wasn't just the Federal Reserve. The administration also was talking about inflation would be under control. So, I think from the Fed standpoint, in hindsight, they clearly waited too long. But having said that, when you're managing the economy and you're the Federal Reserve, I think you have to balance both sides of that equation. I don't buy that the Fed has lost credibility. I think the fact that the Fed moved in 75 basis points, which a month ago is not what the market expected, I think Chair Powell has now signaled another 75 basis points. I think if you look at the dot plots, which I never was a big fan of these dot plots, but that's another story. I think the market understands that expectations are the Fed's going to raise rates. I think the portfolio is just as important, and they're beginning to slow that down. Look, a year ago I said we're going to have 10-year treasuries 3 to 3.5%, and people thought that was really high. We basically have 10-year treasuries at 3 to 3.5%. If the market really didn't have credibility in the Fed, interest rate, the long end would be a lot higher than it is.
Recession has been the key buzzword here at the Qatar Economic Forum, and the CEO of the Qatar Investment Authority thinks that even if Europe enters one, he's still bullish on the region. Mansour bin Ibrahim Al Mahmoud spoke to my colleague Francine Lacroix.
We could go into a recession in some part of the world. Maybe in Europe, I had commented that we might go into a recession in Europe because of the energy prices pressure. But also I have a positive view on Europe in general in the long term. Europe as a destination of a lot of talent. They have a very good education system. It's a touristic destination as well. And they have, on top of this, they have also an advanced program in the renewables, and will give them an advantage over any other, countries. So it might be a little bit difficult in Europe, but in the long run, I'm bullish about it.
So is Europe at the moment your biggest worry, but also your biggest opportunity? If you look at the pot of cash, how much you want to put in Europe compared to other regions in the world?
See, from 2018, once we have announced our strategy, we were very vocal about our concentration in Europe.
Yeah.
And at the same time, we have said that we will not be stopping investing in Europe. We will be very selective. But we are going full speed in the US market and Asia. We have a reference asset allocation in terms of geographies, and we would like to reach a proper allocation between the geographies. But again, Europe, we will not stop investing. We will continue investing. I was in Europe recently, and I'm meeting, and I have noticed a lot of activities in technology space in Europe.
I think at some point you were looking for assets, infrastructure assets in Africa. Is it still the case?
Yeah, of course. I mean, if we can deploy more in African infrastructure, would be fantastic. We have been investing in renewables as well in Africa, and we would like to do more. It's a little bit in a slower pace than other, countries, but we are trying to find our partner to deploy more in Africa.
Anything with Russia? So you have a pretty sizable and considerable assets in Russia. What will happen to them?
Still a status quo. We are not investing more in Russia. At the same time, to be practical, you cannot exit. I know some companies have announced to exit it, but in reality, they couldn't. Mm-hmm. We are monitoring the situation in Russia. We are in full compliance with the international sanction. We are our team on top of this on a daily basis to make sure that they are embedding any update on this sanction. But we always wish and hope that this will be settled very soon for the sake of the people of Ukraine.
Are you in touch with the Russian government about some of these assets?
Not really right now. But we have a big investment in Rosneft. As you know, Rosneft itself is not under sanction. Of course, we have a fiduciary to our future generation. Of course, we will be in touch with them for the dividends that we deserve. But any further investment, no.
What do you do with crypto right now? So it's up, it's down, depends on stable coins or other ones. Are you interested as an asset class?
No, crypto, no. Blockchain, yes. We have very clear view on this, and our team in the technology space are exploring opportunities in the blockchain.
And that's all from the Qatar Economic Forum right here in Doha. You can find complete coverage of the event, including full interviews and articles. The destination, Bloomberg.com. This is Bloomberg.